All right, so this morning we discussed formation agnostic, the warfighting function of movement maneuver, right? But there's so much that applies to fundamentals in fieldcraft in our other warfighting functions. So let's transition. Let's discuss C2 and sustainment.
Roger, sir. So one of the biggest issues that affects units that are trying to establish effective comms here at HTA is the terrain. It does provide a lot of dense cover and concealment. It provides good cover and concealment for a unit, but not optimal or ideal for common waveforms like FM, TSM, HF, etc. Units really have shown a lack of understanding and proper utilization of the equipment that they have and its capabilities in, say, like retrans, deploying retrans, whether it be having the right people there at your retrans, security for your retrans, using speed analysis to determine the placement of your retrans and site management for your CPs, having an integrated S6 that really is embedded in the process to finding locations is really going to help a unit be successful here. I know you guys have seen as the CPs kind of displace some of the terrain issues that they may have.
Yeah, like, especially for the scouts, because like we get out there pretty far, pretty big distances, and like especially here at JMRC, like you get more than a couple hundred meters away from somebody, like terrain's going to start messing with your comms, and they struggle a lot with it. And one of the biggest things they struggle with is pace plans, right? So they'll have this great pace, either FM or TSMs is their primary. Their alternate's going to go to HF or MUOs, right? Or their contingency would be with one or the other, and then EU will be cell phones and all that kind of fun stuff. But like they don't fight through their pace at all. But like especially when it comes to HF or MUOs, is they might know how to use it. The scout platoon might know how to use it, but the receiving end back at either a company CP or battalion CP, they don't know how to use it. So they don't ever have it on. So the scouts are now carrying extra 15 to 30 pounds worth of equipment that they can't use because the receiving end doesn't know how to use it. And then they go straight to the easy button, which is wicker.
Yeah, it goes back to our discussion on fighter management and load plans, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there has really been a complacency when it comes to that pacing plan, like you said, and you do see it at the higher echelons. It's just easier because now units are using their Starlinks or Star Shields. They're using their cellular devices that give you 4G, 5G network, and these systems can go up like that. And it's really they really got complacent. And like you said, when your TSM fails because you're outside of the bubble and those units really push forward, it's just easier. Everyone has cell phone service, or the Starlink takes relatively 10 minutes to set up when you displace. So you're always going to have that connectivity. So units really have to get away from just being reliant on those systems that work and really work your pace plan.
I think it's important to highlight that units have the initial basic proficiency with setting up and operating their equipment. I think where they struggle most is testing that equipment beyond its means and capabilities, because you'll see a lot of times in a COMEX, they're very close. Hey, comms are perfect, whatever. Once you get into the terrain and you have different METC factors that factor into the signal and so on and so forth, that's where they really struggle, is testing and building that confidence and proficiency with making that equipment versatile to any part of the mission in which they need to use it.
Yeah, and we all know it's the subordinate element's job, right, to maintain communications with higher. So that 4-channel pace, right, command, O&I, fire, sustainment, however you want to work it, right, needs to be dictated top down. It needs to be a 4-channel pace horizontally and vertically, right? And so often we talk Starlink and Star Shield, and we're talking emergent technology combined with fieldcraft here. But it all ultimately comes down to one data transport package, right? And so if you have a pace plan of Teams and Wicker off that data backbone, which is the same thing when the Starlink Star Shield goes out, you've just lost 2 elements of your pace right there, correct?
with the the usage of chat-based communication platforms, we'd be remiss not to speak about at least the last 3 units that have used Wicker or ultimately becomes the Pace. And we have talked to units about how do we effectively use this chat-based system, because it becomes an overload of information. And much like your 4-channel Pace, where you have your O&I, A&L, etc., you'll start seeing that now that is kind of transferring over to Wicker, right, or to whatever chat base you're going to use. And so coming up with a naming convention for how you find that information within that chat base is really the difference between, can you find what you need, whether it's a medevac, a log stat, or is it a fires. So if a unit, we recommend that if a unit is going to put Wicker, in this case, anywhere in their Pace, that they do have a naming convention and the ability to search it quickly for whatever you need.
So we talked to antenna placement and retrans, right? And units that employ those techniques successfully can successfully communicate out here, whether it is an OE254 on a retrans site, right? Or it's the 166 Ghost talking TSM and ITN. But ultimately, I think it comes back to signature management, camouflage, right? Dispersion and security. A lot of things we talked about in the movement maneuver function. So successful units can employ it out here, right, in terrain.
Roger, sir, and we have seen it. They did a really good job of deploying their assets and what they had at their retrans, and they were active on the speed element to find the right locations that were going to enable them to talk across the battlefield. And I think just integrating those simple planning processes and training for the equipment that you have is really going to help a unit be successful communicating.
Units that are on like legacy equipment and everything too, especially for the reconnaissance and scout piece, right? So like we can get into field expedient antennas and all that kind of fun stuff. I just don't know if it works with the newer waveforms, right? I don't know if you've seen anything on that side.
So yes, MUOS is one of the ones I think that the scouts can use that are going to enable them. But like we mentioned before, is MUOS always monitored at the battalion level, at the TOC, or at your company CPs? Not all the time. So it's not one of those waveforms that you have to get a good line of sight. And when units moves and jump so often, sometimes it's hard to to lock in to that bird for the MUOS. But MUOS is a very capable system. I think HF is also a very capable system that again is good for long distance communication that is rarely utilized at the higher echelons. So.
What do you think, though? I mean, because we all agree that MUOS is probably the ideal, especially battalion to brigade, company to battalion, maybe not so much platoon to company, more TISM. What is the reluctance for them to get these systems in place?
A lot of times, and I hate to say this, but they'll say, "Hey, brigade isn't high on this. Higher echelons aren't high on this platform." So when there's not really a overutilization at the higher echelons, at brigade levels and higher, battalions don't really use it. They use the means that they have to communicate, which is the easier way.
The Mavens
goes into that cycle
kind of stuff, and Wicker and everything else. Yeah, I think
there's a bigger and broader question, not just for comms, but for all this new equipment we're fielding. It's, do people actually know how to use it? Right. And then this is not a new thing. We've all been in units with JBCPs where we send one guy to the JBCP class, and suddenly his whole platoon and sometimes like the whole company's relying on 1 or 2 soldiers to go around. How do I put my stuff together? How do I make it work? It's broken. How do I fix it? As we introduce more and more new equipment, it's imperative that we get the right people and then that we disseminate that information and that training. And we need to really consider how we do that going forward with all this new stuff.
Yeah, especially with communications, right? Like if we
Right.
can't talk, we can't report, we can't do anything, and having the single point of failure is causing problems.
Right, and with certain systems, it's always going to be a handful of specialist people who know how to use it. But with things like communications, everybody has to know how to use it. And when you start looking at, like, say, a command post or a unit that's going to be particularly far away, like a reconnaissance element, it really has to be everybody who knows how to at least work the majority of those systems confidently.
Yeah. And I think to kind of more towards your point earlier, sir, that we were talking about, is it's the lower echelons level responsibility to gain and maintain comms with communication and higher to help feed into the common operating picture and help the commander in his decision-making process and future operations and current. So with that being said, and what we talked about as far as like the equipment and the maintenance and building the pace plan, I think it's important that company and platoon level, as they're building that pace plan and that comms plan, integrate hires and then understand that capability gap that you're talking about. And the same thing with higher echelon when they're building their plan and disseminating it down to higher, is understanding their subordinate units' capabilities part. Because I see a lot of times they'll focus on, okay, we have this one in common that's primary. Alternate contingency emergency is usually, company or platoon specific, and it's not really at the higher echelon level. So you have that single point of failure that you guys were talking about. And that's a lot of things that are hindering units out here with the communication process.
Well, I mean, I pose a question, right? If the Wicker or the chat-based app is so much easier and more reliable, then what is the forcing function for a unit to like pull out their IT and equipment in the motor pool or wherever? Because if I'm just going to go to Wicker, then why do I need to learn MUOs?
Take away the easy button, right? Force them to force at home station to work all those other systems, so we have a good understanding of them. So we don't have to go straight to the easy button, because you look farther east from here, it's always denied, and they can deny anything they want to at any point in time. So like, if you don't know how to use every system you have in your bag, then you just set yourself.
That's right.
up.
We're training shortcuts.
You need that redundancy as
right.
well, Sergeant Major.
It goes back to qualifying with your iron sight before your optic, right? And so, go ahead with your thought.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, yeah, that's exactly right. Like, you want to take away that easy button. You don't want to make it where everyone has the ability on their cell phone. That's going to give too much of a signature. It's too much of a tactical liability. It's not as tactical as the equipment that we've been getting fielded and units that get fielded. So you really do need to implore the equipment that you have, so that you're not complacent and relying on those.
That's right. And in this environment, in any environment that we go to, real world, will we all have our phones? Will we all be on the network? Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But if we continue to train this way, we will never get good at ITN or any other future systems, right?
And as we're talking fundamentals, iron sights, you mentioned signature. Another thing, we're going one direction with all these, high-tech things that offer us so much capability. At the same time, we still have to stay comfortable and really get comfortable with comms windows, with giving a mission order, say, hey, go execute, report back at this time. That's the other side of that. And it's two kind of opposite things that we have to really get our heads around to move forward, because signature management is a huge piece that everybody forgets about when they go out to the field.
And that's very important with today's EWO environment that we fight in, and as far as that early detection and those comm windows like you were talking about. That's a great point.
Coupled with that, we see the companies fail at the CP level. They're too reliant on their command post vehicles. They're utilizing the vehicular antennas, but say that vehicle is catastrophically killed or something along those lines, the OE254 that should be there in redundancy, or the roll tube antenna, is not set up, nor is the Christmas tree for the MUOS. It's getting comfortable and like having those TTP set up that, all right, we're going to in place here, we're going to disperse our CP, and then we're going to start setting up these specific equipment to enable us to use our radios and whatnot to continue to maintain comms with higher. Or too many people are reliant with their man pack radios, and they're like, oh, I can't reach higher. But it's like, hey, have you tried using your vehicle? Have you tried using your COM 201 that's on your Bradley? Oh, no, I didn't. And then they're gaining and maintaining comms with higher, and the problem is solved.
Well, with on that too, with the fieldcraft portion of that too, like it comes down to RTOs. Like, a few years back, RTOs, like they'll be walking around, and as they lose comms or get comms, they're writing down in a log, hey, in this type of wooded environment or this type of environment, I'm getting comms, I'm at this distance from where I'm at, right? They're not logging any of that kind of stuff. They just like, oh, I can't talk anymore. What do I do?
I was going to say that goes to another thing. having a SOP or a set of guidelines or rules for that RTO so that they understand, like, hey, like we talked about the priorities of work. Like, hey, this is what you're going to do in this event. Like with your battle drills and battle rhythms, there were times that some units, when there's a ComSec compromise or anything, some units, some companies didn't know where to change, how to change over, what to change over to. They didn't know the keywords. They didn't know the platform to use to express that. So having that SOP printed out, not just in your Annex H, but printed out so that RTOs understand that and they walk through it and understand that, will enable them to have success.
And that training
also.
down at the unit level as well will help leaders to understand how much time they can do time analysis. How much time does it take to employ this equipment? It builds that proficiency and fast. And I think a lot of time that's what stunts units here from employing that equipment. If they know they're not going to be in a place for long enough, they're like, well, it's going to take us a while to set it up. Then we got to break it down, and it's going to hold us up. So they rely on that maneuver element to be that retrans site, whatever the case may be, and bounce off of that, and don't do those fixed position retrans sites that they can do and that they can focus on. But as soldiers train with their equipment and become more proficient, that employment time begins to reduce significantly, and you have soldiers that can put them up and put them down. Key tasks are identified, key roles are identified. Soldiers know who's putting this up, who's putting that together, whatever the case may be. Building that proficiency in training is going to build that confidence in the equipment and allow the leaders to stop taking shortcuts and actually employ that. But it takes that leader to enforce that at the lower level.
When we're talking about soldiers training with their equipment too, I think everyone sitting here can attest to the first 24 to 48 hours when a unit comes here on the ground, we can tell whether or not that soldier has ever been, utilizing a JBCP or switching channels on their 163 or 158. That training needs to happen beforehand, and often it doesn't. I would say most of the time across the formation, it doesn't, and soldiers are struggling. They're struggling here on the ground, especially for the first week or so, just trying to learn how to use this equipment that they're using every single day. So that soldier familiarization and soldiers using and learning how to use this equipment before they get here in Sergeant's Time Training or Motor Pool Mondays or whatever forum that command teams want to use to train and make sure that their soldiers come here in that trained so that they're just gaining familiarization and confidence with the equipment is key to success out there.
And so I will say that I won't say units don't come here not knowing or not having that plan. The problem that I see a lot is that they have that one single point of failure, that one SME, that one soldier. They're not building a bench. They're not building continuity. Because if that one soldier's taken out of the fight or that one piece of equipment's taken out of the fight, what are we doing? Who's stepping up? Who's next man up? Who knows this equipment? Kind of building a little bit of a jack of all trades and building that continuity and training, building that bench of individual knowledge throughout their formation. So that way in the event they have to go to an alternate individual to exercise or maintain their plan, then they have that.
And I would recommend too the one soldier scenario, right? But who is the one soldier that we send to the training? Is it the senior sergeant first class who has 15 years of experience and can teach? Or is it the PFC who we think has the most longevity? Who do we typically see? It's the young soldier. I'll fill in, right? And that is, if you can only send one, recommendation that you send your senior guy, that he can come back and be a force multiplier, so that you'll see the sergeant first class or first sergeant who will feel obligated to share that information. How do you use this equipment, as opposed to the PFC who has no power, right? He is not going to say, Sarge, I think we need to create a class for the company. And so recommendation is that when you do these net training, that you send senior level people to really build the program for you.
Absolutely, and I'll say senior level people with longevity. Because a lot of times units will come here and they'll be like, oh, that guy, he's clearing, he's leaving, we didn't bring him with us. And now they lost that SME that they did have, and they only have bits and pieces of knowledge across their formation. But with sending that senior leader, it's also his responsibility now to train the force and train those lower echelon leaders or the operators of that equipment and make sure that they're proficient. And that's primary, alternate, contingency, emergency. That comes with everything as far as operators and building that bench. If you have one single point of failure in your company on any single piece of equipment, you're limiting your commander's options and his decision-making process.
Yeah, and without these comms, again, fighting for communications has to be prioritized. Without comms, the other part of this is that we're seeing a lack of effective reporting to higher headquarters.
Definitely. When we're talking about reporting, log stats is the first thing that comes to mind. Log stats, those are your twice daily reports that the lower echelons are sending for compiling it at the battalion level to control that logistics flow. and commodities throughout the organization. And the phrase that I use every rotation is who is your honest broker? Who has visibility on these reports? Do the right people have visibility on these reports? And do you have somebody stepping in saying, hey, FSC leadership, do we have, if we drew this much class 5 and we issued this much out, and we have not received contact in the last 12 hours, have your numbers really changed? Have they really changed that much? Like, what is happening? Do we have that honest broker who's evaluating the numbers and making sure that we have the accurate data being received and compiled at that battalion level?
Yeah, and so if you're an NCO, senior NCO at Echelon, when you come to the CTC, you are going to hear these terms sometimes for the first time, right? Log stat, per stat, and I specifically, and a lot of our senior NCOs will push these statuses at that, because, like she says, who's the honest broker? In my opinion, it is the NCO, right? It's the team leader who's saying how much water, how much ammo do you have? The squad leader collecting that information, aggregating at the company level, and then ultimately getting it up to battalion. And what we'll see is a kind of a misunderstanding of how exactly we receive resupply.
Definitely. How we receive resupply, and we've already talked about standardization across the board for tactical field SOPs out here. And what does that look like? Are we using the common language? Have we created the shared understanding so that you know what I mean when I'm talking to you or conveying something over the radio or the JBCP or whatever forum I'm using? For example, when I see units start using, they'll color code, they'll use yellow or black or green. What does yellow mean? It's not just about the percentage either, because they say, well, that means you're at 70%. I always recommend use the numbers. Like, tell me how much class 5, tell me how many gallons or liters you have on hand for class 3, tell me how many MREs you have on hand, or give the numbers so that we're using common language, and that anyone reading that, and that the S4 reading that, or the battalion XO, or the FSC commander or XO, or all the XOs who are reading these reports can actually process the information. And we're not wondering what these percentages or what these colors mean. So standardization for common language being used across tactical SOPs is always something that I'm conveying to training units here.
Sure, and I think what we see the most is just gathering the information, right? Just getting the information.
Right. So that begins. Earlier there was a conversation about fundamentals. Well, part of those fundamentals is on the lowest level, team leader going to his soldiers and getting the place report: power, liquid, ammunition, casualties, equipment. Then passing that up. Then the company command posts need to think of themselves, not just as the place from where the commander talks to the rest of the company into the battalion, but as like an integration center. Ideally you want analog products up on the walls with a group of people there who've drilled, like a squad would drill a battle drill. Here's how we set up our information. Here's the actual percentages, so that you don't rely on one person knowing what green or amber or red means. But the command posts need to be set up to integrate all that information so that someone can walk in there and say, okay, I understand how Alpha Company is sitting right now as of this time, and I can talk to other elements across our formation and either pull information or push information and then get the next logistics rolling to enable our next movement.
Yeah, and after we've talked about data collection that's happening at the command post and that integration and those analog and digital products being built, we also need to talk about, are we creating the logistics space for the conversation to happen? Are we creating space for that logistics synchronization meeting that it should be a daily dialogue between key leaders across Echelon in that formation to be discussing, how many commodities we will need, forecasting. This is when kind of the so to speak, the sausage is made. That it's that dialogue, and we have to create that space. We can't just collect all the data and not put it anywhere, or not have that conversation, so that we can be making sure that we're requesting appropriately up, and that we're forecasting what we need to be pushing to lower echelons.
Yeah, so it comes to commodity velocity, right? And it's a clear understanding of the current state and anticipatory logistics for the future state, right? So no matter movement, maneuver, or sustainment, what I'm hearing from the team here is clear and accurate reporting, and then always asking yourself the question, who needs to know, right? Who am I reporting this to that can make decisions at Echelon?
I mean, are there reporting formats for this though? Because I know there are, right? A lot of times they're called the yellow reports. I don't see those being utilized very often. I mean, you can go like, especially in the scout side of the world, like we have report formats for everything, including the yellow reports, right, for log stats, and I don't see them being utilized. And like, I don't know, like, I think that definitely helps streamline a lot of things. If it's just, you have your standardized report formats, you're getting those twice a day, you're sending those up twice a day, and then you're speaking the common language across all the fields.
It goes back to home station training though. The first time that they'll use a log stat is when? A CTC most likely, or maybe if they have a creative battalion or company CalFex. So, a recommendation is that you use these at echelon, at squad live fire or gunnery, et cetera, to get into the muscle memory of using that. If you get here and it's the first time, then of course it's not built into the system and you won't remember. And this is why I say you have to have a swim lane. Who is responsible for making sure that the log stat is complete? We got the information and up.
Yeah, and I this is when I circle back to the honest broker phrase, because a lot of times I see people, whether or not they're using the official yellow reports, whether or not they use that, the information will be inaccurate. There are going to be companies that do it better, or that have an XO who's managing this better, and a commander and a first sergeant who are managing this better, and the accuracy of the information. And then there's going to be at least one who's just, they're not quite there yet. And that's when you have your honest broker, when the FSC steps in, or the S4, and they know how many commodities is on hand, how many we need to be requesting, how many we are requesting, how many we drew this morning, how many we're drawing tonight. They have all those numbers and they can say, hey, like that's not accurate. And that pushback needs to happen, not only so that learning is happening at all levels and so that those lower subordinate leaders are actually learning how to maintain commodity tracking, because there are going to be inaccurate reports received for sure.
And ma'am, for the inaccurate reporting, right? I'm not going to do it, so the XO just fills in some numbers, or the
Yeah.
S4 fills.
Yes.
What we see here is it affects logpack. It
Yes.
affects too much, too little, not enough, too much exposure.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
I think that too often sustainment across the battlefield is more of a reaction instead of a response. We want to train logisticians and all of our sustainers and everyone. It's an everyone problem, because we all need sustainment in order to keep the fight going. So it's really training everybody to think of it as a response. A reaction is, when you get hit and you snap back. The response is when we have the time and the space, and we create the time and the space to plan what we need for the next 24, 48. If you're getting to 72 hours, great. Like, that's great to see out here. But too often it's, 12 hours. It's midnight and we just received the report. You've got a unit out there that is black on ammunition. It's midnight. We know Op 4, the opposing force, is rolling around looking for them, hunting them, trying to kill them, and they don't have class 5 to exchange with the enemy. So that's where we're building the anticipatory nature of logistics out here and making it a response rather than a reaction.
That's right.
That's
I
very
think
good.
one thing that we try to talk to, at least when we're talking to the S4s and the command teams, is we want you to anticipate what you need 3 days from now. This log pack that you're going to get today is to resupply your third DOS. Right. What's preventing units, though, in your opinion? What's preventing them from doing that? Because again, how do we prevent uncoiling our distro, getting them out there for emergency resupply? How do we do that?
I think two things. We already mentioned the inaccurate reporting. That happens. And then if you don't have that seasoned, honest broker who's analyzing the information as carefully as they need to be, I would say often it's senior level buy-in for this, and the importance of the battalion level XO managing those XOs and processing this information and working with the S4 and the integration and their input in this conversation. And that, again, the logistics synchronization meeting rarely happens out here, and when it does, it is just a night and day difference for how we are building out, and we're getting up to that 72 hour, we're getting up to that anticipation, we're getting up to that, logistics being a response. The battalion XO, that senior level leadership and management of that conversation that's happening with logistics throughout all the lower echelons, that buy-in and that management is critical for reaching that anticipation level, reaching that, hey, we're now able to plan out, and anticipate 72 hours out. Units can skate by if they are skating by off emergency resupplies here during rotation, but This is 10 days, and they know that, and that is not sustainable for a long fight. That's not sustainable for reality, and that's not sustainable for the next war that we're going to be fighting.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention too at the company and platoon levels, as far as not just the planning process itself, but remembering to continue to reassess that plan and provide those running estimates to hire, so that way they can prioritize utilization of logistics and how that they're going to push them out and the frequency and so on and so forth, and prioritize it in their planning process.
And that it really starts with structure, right? We see lots of units that are busy fighting their plan instead of fighting the fight. The only way you can get out of that sort of knife fight, whether it translates to emergency resupply or however it manifests, is you start with a battle rhythm. We've seen units without them. You need a battle rhythm, and then you need to adhere to it and enforce it. From the top, that means, hey, the log sync maintenance meeting, they're happening at this time. We need these reports at this time. At the lowest level, that starts with, hey, every morning we're getting green 2, we're getting yellow reports sent up. Like you said, Sergeant Major, like it starts with what do we integrate in home station on the basic level, right? We do green 2s all the time. And I've said 95% of the time they get that right. Mm-hmm. We don't do yellow reports all the time. Same thing with the staff. Is a staff fighting off of a battle rhythm that it understands intuitively, so that then they can get out of that knife fight and really drive operations.
Yeah, and so, this ideal situation of we've got all our commodities, we've reported them. One concern that we have here is that typically units will show up here and assume that they've gotten all the reports right, that they don't have a good plan on how to receive said commodity. And what we're asking and recommending is that you do have a plan, a home station training plan to receive the commodities. And man, what have you seen, and what does doctrine say? What are some ideal ways to receive said commodities?
The push and the shared communication created from top to bottom, and it needs to be understood bottom up. But when you're creating a logistics, release point, and when you show up, you have an open and a close window. The release point is open. We're open for business. Commodities will be pushed, and when we're closed, it's because time on target. It's because we can't just stay out there. We cannot just linger out there. We are behind enemy lines. Your sustainment nodes are going to be bare minimum security and just fighting to survive out there. So that's important to understand, and that message needs to be understood by those receiving units, by those lower echelons. Hey, I have this window in which to show up, and I need to be there, and I need to immediately, both units need to be pulling security. I see the S2 information gathered for those log packs and for those pushes is usually lacking. They usually soldiers don't know what the enemy looks like. They don't know how many the enemy are going to be out there. They'll see the enemy will come into their AO, and they just won't engage because they don't know it's the enemy. I see that all the time, almost every rotation.
Yeah, I would say that for the log pack operation, the LRP operation is again one of those operations that is not conducted before you get here. Right, because you just don't want to do it, you don't care to do it, you think it'll just magically happen. And what you'll see is you'll get here, and they'll have the commodities out there. They won't have a plan to receive it. They won't secure it. They'll continue to do emergency resupplies, which will burn out your distro. Now we're having issues with either maintenance or, God forbid, rollovers. And so we recommend that you do have a plan, whether it's tailgate, whether it's service station, cache, whatever it is, and I think we've seen all be successful at varying times of the fight, but you do have to come here with a plan.
Come here with a plan. Come here. How many times are you going to use a route? 1 time, 2 time? Are you going to rotate? Are you going to alternate? What is your times that you're pushing out? Your push times, your open and close times. Don't be using the same things. Don't create a pattern that the enemy will exploit out here.
That's right, and having people a redundancy of who is going to collect said equipment. One, some people will bring an entire distro into a CTCP. Some will bring your distro from the BSA to an LRP, and they all work and they all don't work, right? And so they've resulted in the same. Some are successful, some are not. But you do have to come here with a plan and figure out how you're going to do that. And if you think you're going to go 10 days without it, you're mistaken, right?
Yes.
One thing though here, especially here, right? Like having a plan that's great, and not using the same routes and all that kind of stuff but we see a ton here. LRPs just go sit in the middle of a field in the wide open or right on the road, just staying exposed. And if their window is 2 hours, that's them sitting still for 2 hours on the middle, and that usually leads to, like Sergeant Major likes to say, mezcal.
Which again, though, is a result of not having practiced it, right? You get here and it's like, I have to collect this up. I don't know exactly what to do. I feel very comfortable in this field. And mass cow happens. And again, and no training happens, right? So that is the ultimate problem, is that the training is not happening. And these distro people end up getting captured or killed. Commodities aren't exchanged. And, and ultimately this could have been prevented by simply just rehearsing it, even if it's right before you get here.
Well, and there's also a balance. We have heavy equipment, sustainers. We're in, LHSs. We're pulling trailers. We've got flatbeds. We've got crates. We have kicker boxes. We don't have, we're not in ISVs, so that's a balance. As far as sitting in an open field, it's also a balance of soldier familiarization and comfortability with that equipment. The HEMT can go a lot of places. Our fuelers and our LHS, those vehicle frames, they're actually a lot more mobile than a lot of units out here, and a lot of the junior soldiers who are driving and operating that equipment. I think a lot of times it boils down to them not understanding that item and not knowing how far they can push it, and that it can go beyond just an open field. I've seen them safely even go into terrain that surprises even me sometimes. So I've definitely seen it, and I want more soldiers to be getting in that, hey, I'm not even comfortable, but I'm going to push it because that's what they're here for. They're here to push themselves to the edge a little bit past, but then we pull them back. So.
But I mean, could some of that be helped with like maybe doing some type of recon of the LRP site?
Yes, leaders recon. I talk to the leaders regularly. That is, if you're not going out there, and you have to go out there, you have to have somebody who knows what that equipment can and cannot do. Bring a senior leader. Bring somebody who says, hey, like this is, we can get our flat racks. We can drop a flat rack here. We can get in this. It's tight, but it's more, we're not more as visible by drones or by the enemy. So bring a senior leader. Taking that extra couple hours and doing that and getting beyond that map reconnaissance is key for success of those operations.
So similar to our discussion this morning, what I'm hearing is the fundamentals in fieldcraft pertain to sustainment. Quartering parties, use of quartering parties, concealment, camouflage, dispersion, security, it all applies, correct?
Absolutely, sir.
Yeah, and if you don't, ultimately if you're not paying attention to distro, right? This is something I encountered as a battalion CSM, is if distro and FSC is not practicing night driving, they're not practicing driving under nods, they're not checking BII, you do get this problem. And they'll come out here for the first time. In some cases, they're now running log packs at 2 a.m. having never actually done this before, or in some cases only one person has a set of nods. How do we mitigate that?
Just by getting soldiers behind the wheel at night. That's the only, and I used the word comfortable earlier, which probably isn't the correct word to use, because I've been doing this for almost 3 years, and when you're driving at night in unknown terrain off the road by yourself with nods, maybe you should just never feel comfortable. Maybe that's just the reality of our jobs. We don't have a comfortable job. It's okay to not feel comfortable, as long as you know your equipment and you have that familiarization. So getting soldiers behind the wheel at night, getting them out there, using it and pushing it to the limits, and you get stuck, that's okay, because we have a plan when you get stuck. We have equipment that we can use to recover it. So
And pulling on that thread, I'm sorry, so go ahead.
Confident, not comfortable.
confident, not comfortable.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, fearless, right? Like I'm so
Yes.
confident with this that even if I got my seatbelt on, I got my nods on, and I roll this thing over, I'm doing it safely, and I'm going to be
Yes.
okay. And leaders accepting that this is a dangerous business.
Yes.
We might have a rollover, but we're going to mitigate it, right?
Yes.
But I do want to pull on the thread of Class 9, right? We're seeing not a lot of Class 9 coming out over the course of the last few rotations. What do you think that's about?
Class 9, it opens a whole another dialogue with the 5988's receipt and processing. So Class 9, when the 5988's are pushed up, our ESRs, those reports that are being uploaded, all the 5988's, and that information should trigger the ESR being updated, and it should trigger the parts being put on order for that particular item, and the receipt of the 5988s and the PMCS at that lower echelon level, at that soldier level, that's not really happening out here. Soldiers aren't getting under and around their vehicles every single day to check to make sure that hey, we're doing that basic ticket item.
I agree. I think the building of proficiency at that individual operator level is just not happening. A lot of times we'll see these individual operators go to PMCS their vehicle and they're doing it off of what they can remember. They don't actually have the TM out. They're not going by the checklist. They're not doing it at the frequencies that it mentions in the TM that they should do it before, during, and after operations. So they're just not proficient in the actual execution of maintaining this equipment. And they're not really familiar with troubleshooting it either. Which can help them prolong the need for maintenance or identifying an early need for a part and setting up that request so they don't necessarily lose that piece of equipment 100%. They can kind of forecast what they're going to need, i.e. oil. We've seen units come here and fail to request oil or fail to forecast oil and lose 3 or 4 Bradleys. I mean, that's not cheap by any means.
No, I think the faults aren't being identified. They're not being annotated on 5988s. They're not being input.
verified.
They're not being verified. They're not being inputted into the equipment, the status report, that documentation that's being uploaded. Then parts aren't being ordered. So we're just limping on. I see units just limp along out here and we'll just get it moving. We'll just get it out the door.
That comes down to discipline and some of the fieldcraft of that, right? Like I've been in and around vehicles a lot of my career too. Like you can even go down to the light fighter too. Like there's no 2-minute drills being happening. Like, those 2-minute drills, like anytime you stop, for a couple minutes or whatever, your driver's getting out and he's doing a quick check of the headlights and this track or wheels, or it's checking for any type of damage, anything sticking out from underneath the vehicle, whatever it might be, right? He's doing that quickly in 2 minutes, then he's get back in the vehicle and they can ready to go. Like little things like that just aren't happening.
Yeah, and the timeliness of reporting too and sending it up. I mean, we say every report is important, and if every report's important, then none of them are important, right? But if you prioritize what you need and setting up those maintenance reports and get them up as fast as possible to the proper channels to get at least that part on order and get that motion started is what's very important. I think leaders at the company and platoon level aren't understanding the importance of that. The XO does, because he deals with it every time and he's the one who's setting it up, or how come I didn't know about this, or whatever the case might be. But again, that's that single point of failure. So educating that formation and making sure that they understand the importance of that, especially with these new units where we're fielding these ISVs where it's newer to them and so on and so forth. They're not familiar with that maintenance process.
Yeah, and I would say the commander influence, right, when it comes to 5988 and maintaining equipment, because it is a it's directly affects his combat power, right? If I am not, and it's much just like running out of water. Right, I'm going to drink all my water to the end. I'm going to request more water. I'm going to drive this vehicle until it breaks, and I'm going to request some Class 9, which is affecting combat power at echelon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I have the dialogue often out here, almost every rotation, for the senior maintenance tech, whether it's a warrant officer, whether it's an NCO, whether there's an MCO in that seat out here, whoever is that senior maintenance technician. Don't just assume that if nothing is received, everything is okay. If you have a 72-hour 5988 cycle, I've seen a 7-day, I've seen a 24-hour, seen a lot of different cycles for the 5988 receipts, but receive something. Have a system in place that has been communicated, whether it's a shared digital forum or an Excel spreadsheet where people are going in there. Make sure that somebody is going in there and inputting information that you are then saying, okay, if the 5988, if no faults are on this item, then somebody needs to be going in there who's responsible for that equipment and actually inputting that information so that senior maintenance tech can have that confirmation. Whether it's true or not, they need that confirmation. It's not up to them to assume the risk themselves and just assume that it is okay and that it is.
Your system in place comment I think is great, and because we've seen units, it's really the reporting mechanism, right? We've seen units here be relatively successful without using 5988s in a paper format.
Yes.
And that's okay. Whatever the reporting mechanism is, whatever the format is, it's the reporting in the system that matters. It's about prioritization, and it's about having an accountability mechanism. Whether you choose to do it on a piece of paper or over MS Teams, doesn't matter. Having that battle rhythm, having that accountability, having that reporting trained ahead of time, prepared to come here and execute.
Some of it is also tied to the movement and maneuver portion. A lot of units aren't having their site selections for where they're going to conduct PMCS. A lot of them are choosing terrain that is not very dense, lightly vegetated, and they're so close to the point where they're less than 50 meters from a road. So for armored units, choosing a small piece of terrain, it's hard to PMCS and do the proper maintenance required for these vehicles, because if they get out of their vehicles and they go to start making noise, like they're in one form of contact, i.e. Drone, and they're more than likely going to take IDF, because it could potentially be on the commander's high priority list for that. And then with the ISVs, we're unfamiliar with the maintenance aspect because they're under warranty, so there is no familiarization. They're just like, oh, hey, this piece of equipment's too new, and it's probably not going to break over the next 10 days because we've only had it 3 months. And it's just like that familiarization. So when potentially warranties end, it's like going to be a shock and awe effect, because they're going to have to start doing something they haven't been doing for the previous X amount of months that they own the piece of equipment.
That's right. The maintenance portion of it, though, is not unlike being in a patrol base, right? Do we eat up on the line? Do we sleep up on the line? Do we do weapons maintenance on the line? We don't, right? What do? We pull back. And the units that come in with that mindset of, I'm going to pull this Bradley tank off the perimeter into the center under some canopy to conduct maintenance is effective, right? And then you also 100% security, right? And so that is a TTP that would be successful. I think it's important to understand that, like, this thing has got to keep going. I need to get the part in the system so that it is on the way. There might be this kind of 10-day, mindset of I'll get through it, but then at the end, when you get to RSOI, now you have a bunch of down vehicles, a bunch of parts are all going to come at the same time, and you're trying to get out of here. Now, I would like to bring up, though, the fact that when you have all these down vehicles, it does increase, in this case, like maybe a CTCP, the FTCP, we've increased our footprint now, which is causing issues, right? It's causing issues for security at the sustainment nodes now.
Absolutely. This is it's already been mentioned in previous conversation, the conversations for the movement and maneuver portion of this before, but dispersion is the best friend and my biggest recommendation for the survivability of sustainment nodes out here. And it's not comfortable. It can be frustrating managing more different smaller nodes, but a smaller footprint and a footprint that is creating redundancy, that is splitting up your fueling assets, your haul assets, your lift, your load assets, split them up and put them across the battlefield. When one is destroyed, we can still fight, we can still push commodities, we can still pull commodities from the rear, make sure that you're not putting them all in one place, and break them up and keep them moving. Lieutenant Colonel Siebert already mentioned, we've got 9 forms of contact. The enemy is out here actively searching for you to kill you via 9 forms of enemy contact. So move before you're detected, because there's probably a drone overhead, you're probably tired, you probably don't even know it's there, or the enemy, they'll sneak in, at night under cover of darkness. Whatever form of contact, they've already identified you. If you've been sitting somewhere 24 or 48 hours, just expect that they know where you are and that they're hunting for you. So move. Don't wait until you get attacked or wait until you have a drone strike. Just plan those movements in, move, disperse, create redundancy.
Yeah, I think it's also just prioritizing security of the rear area, right? Using, much like we talked about earlier with, using drones to protect, dispersion, and ensuring that you do have some means to protect yourself. That's what we don't see, right? We see a bunch of mechanics turning wrenches saying, well, I'm just here to fix stuff. Especially when it comes to maybe more heavier units, ABCTs. What have you seen that is how do they mask that massive CTCP?
They don't.
That's right.
That's the short answer. There's
Mask
no, we don't, the modern battlefield, we can't be invisible. We can't just, you're going to have a electromagnetic footprint, you're going to have a physical footprint, you're going to have a digital footprint, you're going to have, fill in the word, footprint. So again, that's why I always recommend, hey, disperse, make sure you have redundant assets at each node and continue to move. A moving target is harder to hit. That's just the reality of it. So how do we mask it? It's
right. I think a little bit though, especially units coming here, and I've been here a long time, seen a lot of it, is sometimes it's this places leading laziness. And they, especially back there in those areas, they're like, oh, I'm just here to work on vehicles. I'm not really part of the game right now. They're not even wearing miles gear or nothing. They're just worried about fixing vehicles, and they don't care if they take IDF.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, I mean, I think some of that's a mindset that like we have to try to keep them in. But I think at the end of the day, that's a leadership problem, keeping their guys engaged and their guys and girls engaged, saying, hey, got it right. This is laser tag, but it's still real life. We have to treat it that way.
Well, the key point to that is the modern transparent battlefield. There is no sanctuary, period.
Yes.
Right.
Your life is on the line as much as anyone else, and so this importance and what we're talking today in fundamentals truly matters at Echelon for all organizations.
I think another good point to bring up too is more towards your question as far as the maneuver element and the bigger footprint that they're creating. I think it's naturally going to happen because the amount of time that it takes, the increase in time it takes to conduct any type of maintenance on that equipment. One way that we can affect that at the company and platoon level and reduce that time is just as important it is for the individual to conduct their checks and their PMCS and report it to higher. It's just as important for higher echelon leaders to trust but verify and ensure that that's happening frequently and often, like we discussed. So that way those parts can be unordered, they could plan for that, they can account for that. They have additional time for planning for survivability measures, counter UAS, more time to camouflage and whatever the case may be. And or prevent that actual engine from going down that takes 15 hours to replace, and they have to pull a pack, and now they're tied to a location for 24 to 48 hours while they're maintaining that one or two vehicles that they're working on with however many personnel they have on ground. So I think it's kind of like a whole concept package when you're looking at how do we reduce that footprint, how do we increase survivability of that element, and how do we help them. It's just as much a responsibility at starting at the individual operator level all the way up.
Yeah, I don't think it's from lack of trying that they have these massive footprints. They'll get in there and it becomes overwhelming, right? And just to be, if you're a maintenance team coming to JMRC, you will die in the rear area from that indirect. But ultimately, it's that leader looking at his terrain and saying, "Hey, I do have a wood line over there. I have some camo nets over here. It might not be the status quo, perfect circle, but you're going to have to figure it out. Otherwise, commanders will lose the assets. You're going to lose, and at least in the JMRC perspective, you're going to lose that person, those assets for 24 hours. So you have to have a plan of getting yourself safed in that area so that you can continue to build combat power."
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And when you're saying, hey, leaders are going to have to figure it out at Echelon, that is key. Figuring it out isn't sitting on a corner in a completely flat and open field because it's, the best place to conduct maintenance. I get it, in the rear, by the rear, I mean, in garrison, it's obviously we have big open flat terrain, but it should be pushing the systems. You should be figuring it out. You should be tucked in that wood line. You should be covering concealment. All of that should be happening, and it won't be as comfortable as it is in garrison. And that's how it is out here.
So two practical things for training in home station. One is if you're going to set up your maintenance footprint while you're training in the rear, get your UAS operators some more flight hours, fly it, and show your FSC what they look like. Show your HHC with their command post set up. What do you actually look like? Because the idea is to make yourself not look like an attractive target for fires, right? The enemy's going to be hunting, so you want them to hunt something that's not a critical node for the organization. And the other thing too is drill. How long does it actually take one of those command posts to break down and move and set back up? For the FSC, it's even harder because there's just so much stuff and other people's stuff.
Yeah.
So practice, and it'll never be perfect. It'll never be as fast as you want it to, but just the act of drilling and practicing, hey, we got it done in X many minutes, builds this idea in the company of we need to be able to break down, move, set back up, and do it from a dispersed way to a new location and disperse again. But you got to build that mental muscle movement into their heads.
I will say their ability to actually, implement SUAS and drive it out there and recon the area and so on and so forth. A lot of units don't have that yet because it's focused more down on the maneuver element. But it comes back to the individual training that we already talked about that every single individual person needs. Everybody's a soldier first, right? So integrating and taking those support elements and integrating them into those maneuver elements during that training at home station builds that command relationship to where if that element does need that, additional recon element, they can reach out to somebody they know who has it and utilize it for them, and so on and so forth. And those soldiers now have that proficiency in providing their own security and actually reaching out to gain additional assets to increase their survivability and their site selection process.
And commanders have to balance, what do they, do they want to protect them? Do I want to squad in the flat, or do I want a squad protecting the rear area so that I can build combat power? It's something that you'll have to figure out. Like, do I want to put a platoon? I think the last brigade here put I think a platoon on their brigade rear area, but like little rear area security. So then you're forced to kind of protect yourself. In which case you typically don't have the manpower to do that, and then it results in poor security and casualties.
Yeah. Hey, great conversation. You all mentioned it at some point, right? So the other side of sustainment, and we know it is going to happen inevitably, are casualties. So let's transition. Let's talk effective TTPs we've seen out there. What works, what doesn't regarding CASEVAC and Medevac?
Okay, so yeah, the casualties, it is a very is a huge concern for most units that come in here. They all understand that they're going to take dozens, if not hundreds, most likely hundreds of casualties. And what we want to address first is the prolonged field care name that is being used a lot. We're not going to talk prolonged field care. The Army is still kind of defining what that means, even though there's a lot of publications and doctrine out there, or not necessarily doctrine, but information for us to kind of decipher what we think they mean. And what we have, at least what we've discussed, is we think it's a set of skills, right? My concern, and what we'll discuss here, is not necessarily prolonged field care, but just the lack of field care, right? We are not seeing people using, not at a frequency that is acceptable, people doing their self-aid, buddy aid, having a good plan of transitioning from the point of injury to the role one. And so that's what we'll really talk about specifically on, what skills are we not seeing, what are we lacking, and what can we help you out with a recommendation. But I'd like to start off first. The thread that most units here are starting to pull is, do I keep fighting and worry about my casualties later and with the potential die of wounds, or do I halt in place, manage these casualties, and then not, potentially not meet your objective? And what do you guys think?
Yeah, I think commanders our units are really struggling with making that decision of, as we transitioned from COIN to ULO and now MDO, in the continual fight, and as we're pushing forward, I think commanders need to start identifying within their formation like an acceptable loss and risk mitigation, as far as identifying two leaders. Like, hey, if you have two guys that go down, we're not going to halt the entire platoon. We're not going to halt the entire company. We're not going to stop operations, because that's going to affect the overall operations of the battalion, the overall operational picture itself. So I think leaders understanding and identifying prior to, like, what's an acceptable point, at which point, and which echelon is going to manage that casualty collection point and the actual training itself. As far as individual training goes, when it comes to skills and proficiencies, it's what we've been saying. It has to be trained at the individual level. Leaders need to push it across the formation. They need to follow the annual training guidance that's already published out there, create those CLS certified soldiers, and make sure that they identify those aid and litter teams, primary, alternate, and so on and so forth, so the soldiers are proficient within their formation and treating those casualties. So if it is left to a team of 2-3 guys to stay with 1 or 2 casualties while the remaining element continues to fight, those soldiers are proficient in providing that prolonged field care for that individual casualty.
And it seems like some of that is forgotten upon prior to them even going into the box in their operations order. Like, normally you would plan, hey, this is my route, here's CCP1 at this time and distance away from LD, etc., and identifying all those potential CCPs and how they're going to and who they're going to leave behind. That's something I have not heard here at all, even whether it's dismounted, mounted, and that's just for infill, let alone follow-on operations from when they finally get to their primary objective and then they get follow-on orders. It just seems a lack of the basics, and we just need to go back and figure out, like, just the basics, you know what I mean?
And then there's also, like, a lack with the soldiers. There's a lack of confidence when it comes to giving buddy aid or self aid, and you see that the soldiers might see, you might hand a casualty card to one of their battle buddies or something, and they're hands off. Nobody wants to take the initiative to assist the soldier, even when they're not fighting, after they're fighting, and results in the casualty bleeds out, or it's too long, and.
Yeah, what the units typically are saying when we conduct our kind of senior leader AAR is like we just didn't train it enough before we got here. Right? We didn't incorporate into squad, team live fires, we didn't incorporate into platoon. And so if you now are here at your collective CTC and you're, hey, now I need you to really focus on this life-saving skill, it's just not muscle memory, much like we've talked about in the other subjects. And so it affects the unit on what they're going to do, right? Do I carry this guy out and I take 4 shooters off the objective, or do I keep fighting and then worry about kind of what are my numbers going to look like for die to wounds? And we recommend to not worry and just do what you're supposed to be doing, regardless of what what you think JMRC or CTC is going to judge you on. You just need to fight the way you think you're going to fight for real, and it depends on the situation. Met TC specifically, like, am I going to keep fighting, or am I going to let this, or am I going to kind of stop what I'm doing? I would like to think that the unit would like to focus on maintaining or gaining and maintaining fire superiority, securing the objective, securing at least an area, and then once we're secure, then we can move back, triage, and then potentially get them out. When we get to the prolonged field care conversation, it's really, again, back to not prolonging in this case, because I looked up some of the prolonged field care subjects are things like patient monitoring, resuscitation, ventilation, definitive airway control, nursing and hygiene, telemedicine. So these are all things that are great, right? But I just have this PFC who just needs to plug a hole, put a tourniquet on my man over here who's bleeding out, right? And so that is what we recommend, is just the basics and incorporating that into all levels of training, whether it's live fire training or it's multiple Monday, maintenance Monday, whatever it is, because most infantry squads aren't out there conducting maintenance unless they have ISVs, in which case maybe they are. But I would say, what skills do we think, probably at the junior level, the team and squad, would you guys see, like, if they just did this thing, they would be successful and a lot less dead?
I mean, all the little basics, but like if you're talking like on the medical side of the house, like everybody's CLS. Like there's not, hey, these 2 guys are CLS for my squad, whatever. Like the whole squad's CLS qualified or trained, right?
But specifically, what skills of CLS, right? Because you got, needle decompression, you have nasopharyngeal.
They first have to learn how to assess.
That's right.
Assess a
Hemorrhaging,
casualty.
right?
Airway.
Right. So what we're seeing is fluid control,
Yep.
right? So how do we get after that?
Like
Just being able to, hey, do I know where my tourniquet is? Do I use my tourniquet? Do I use my buddy's tourniquet? Do I know how to properly put it? Do I know how to properly put the timestamp on them for when the tourniquet is? Do I know how to do an ETB, Israeli bandage? Like, it just comes down to, do I have this piece of equipment? Am I using mine or am I using theirs? Because sometimes units will come here and they might be out of Class 8. Like, they might not have the medical supplies to conduct said life-saving preventions because they're afraid, because that's all they have. They might not have enough for them. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
No,
And it's important. Training builds proficiency. Proficiency builds confidence. I think we can't hit on that enough. Just building that confidence down at the lower echelon level and equipment and capabilities of each individual and the unit as a whole at different echelons of what they have available to maintain a casualty is just going to go leaps and bounds with units here. It's also important, I think, to mention what happens if they don't. Well, we see a lot of units here, and they'll stop for those 2 casualties. They'll stop for those 3 casualties after they just got hit by, a 3-man enemy OP, and they'll stop. And within 5 minutes of the entire element stopping, there's IDF. Now you're taking out a platoon and a half, and then that platoon and a half now requires another platoon to stay back and tend to them, and 5 minutes later they're repeating that fire mission. So for survivability purposes, it's also important to understand that if you have that 1 or 2 casualties, that plan's already identified prior to movement and execution. It's not happening on the ground. two guys in my platoon go down, I know that squad's leaving a team behind. Now that team, where is that other team going? He's going to this platoon. That's the call I'm making. You know, they mark their location, Charlie, Mike, and continue the fight, because we're seeing a lot of senior leaders getting taken out of the fight, and especially senior enlisted advisors, so senior enlisted commanders or senior enlisted NCOs getting taken out of the fight, and not being able to support that command making decision and future operations, because they're the SME and a lot of the individual soldier tasks and proficiencies that you're talking about, because we used to train a lot of this stuff, but then we stopped the frequency. So, as my peer said, mandating that CLS is required for all individuals, and making it again an annual training guidance requirement for everybody to be CLS trained and certified will build that proficiency and build that confidence in that formation to be able to leave that small element behind and increase their survivability, but maintain combat strength that the commander can fight with later.
That's right. And I guess the other thing that would be successful or would help your success here is your CASVAC planning and sustainment rehearsal, right? Specifically, brigades will do a sustainment rehearsal. Sometimes they may or may not incorporate CASVAC as if it's a separate part of sustainment. What we recommend is that when you leave your brigade sustainment rehearsal, that you have a battalion sustainment rehearsal that is effective, and that you are talking not just about casualties, and you're talking all commodities, but putting an emphasis on what is a battle drill for getting these casualties from point of injury to a CCP, from CCP to Roll 1, how are they triaged, what does it look like, and then having some plans and routes, like what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. Are you guys seeing any kind of emerging TTPs, anything effective that you would recommend units come?
So, Sergeant Major, so one of the things that I saw most effective was from the most previous unit, is that one of the company that I was following, they were unable to get the assets available to conduct a CASVAC. So they called one of their sister companies, and their sister companies was in the area and was able to CASVAC them for them. It's just having that awareness of who's around you and just leveraging people and equipment to best suit the evacuation of casualties, whether it's adjacent units or if you can do it yourself.
That's right. Yeah, the unit you're talking, they also did the blood bank. They also did the drone delivery of blood. So they were very, very unique. Very unique, and it doesn't happen a lot, but you do have to come here with that understanding that I'm going to have to do something a little bit different here, to include potentially walking them out. Yeah. There's also, people that walking wounded are moving back to Roll 1s or CCPs on their own, which is a TTP you're seeing in Ukraine right now, not necessarily at JMRC, although they are authorized to move back on their own.
But it comes out of planning, though, with it. Like, so a lot of units will go ahead and hit that easy button. Hey, we're moving from TAA to our objective. We're generally moving in this direction. This is our route. We'll call out all the CCPs are going to be rolling. So like as we hit here, then it's going to be here. Like nobody actually takes the time to plan those CCPs and AXPs at all anymore. They're just like, they'll just be rolling.
And then I think
we'll figure it out on the way.
Yep, a segue from planning would be the rehearsal aspect of it. So
that's
in
right.
that sustainment rehearsal, I do think it's a great, they should be having a follow-on medical rehearsal, but also having that shared conversation in the sustainment rehearsal where you rehearse, you have vignettes where you're rehearsing, hey, we receive a mass cal, and you have the whole brigade, all sustainment outlaid on the battlefield and all the medical. And at this point in the fight, we have a mass cal right here at this coordinate. How do we CASVAC casualties? We don't have anything there to CASVAC. What is my nearest LMTV, or what is my nearest asset that can be used and pushed forward or pushed across the battlefield? Who has it? Who owns it? And having them in that vignette, in that conversation during the rehearsal, and actually rehearsing it after the planning.
Especially the resources, right? Mm-hmm. You'll see typically they'll have a general plan of a mass cal. Hey, we're going to pull an LMTV from here. But they typically don't kind of pre-stage it, right? So I've always recommended, hey, if you're gonna do a major assault in 24 hours from now, start gathering your supplies, start gathering your resources, maybe establish them somewhere at a CTCP or a central location. All too often, they'll start trying to kind of pull the chain on all the resources after the mass cal has already happened, right? And now we are trying to figure out how we're going to do this. We're under contact, and so it can be flushed out in the sustainment rehearsal if it's done effectively.
Yes.
right? And typically it's not. It's kind of like, yeah, we're going to go here, we're going to go there. And so really a good TTP is to have a plan for sustainment, rehearsals, and to have the key players there, right? And the key players I would recommend are your first sergeants, your XOs, your S3s, your CSM, all the kind of bill payers and stockholders of who's going to fight this plan. But what'll happen is we're too busy. I can't get the 3 here. I can't get the meadow here. And then will result in kind of just a disjointed plan. And then, again, now you just got a lot of dead people. No one really got the training. And it's unfortunate because these guys will sit there for the next 18 to 24 hours trying to get, regenerated. And they're not getting the training in. So the ISV, right? So we're seeing a lot of ISVs. We know Casevac works pretty effective. Medevac works pretty effective on the platforms that we have. Now we're starting to see the ISV in variants, right? Different variants. What are you guys thinking? What would you recommend to maybe an RTU coming in here that is ISV enabled?
So ISVs, they are very unique. They're very fluid to get casualties out, but they're also cumbersome in the fact that they can only hold one litter patient at a time. Like if you have a ISV and you have a lot of ambulatory patients, like they're that's good. They can sit in there as long as the proper care has been rendered. But when you have a mass cal with many littered patients, all you're going to see is a ton of ISVs going back and forth trying to bring them from the potential platoon CCP to the company CCP, which is increasing the signature, and there's more than likely is a drone in the air who's potentially going to follow on with IDF.
Yeah, the ISV, I think much like, TSM, right? It's good for, POY to CCP, maybe not as effective from CCP to Roll 1, right? And so I think units are going to start kind of having emerging, they'll start figuring out their own fieldcraft. What do you think?
It's kind of like you said, though. It's got to be that willingness to have that alternate plan. If it comes down to guys on the ground walking that casualty back, then they very well need to do so. Yes, it's going to take a little bit longer of time, but reducing that signature is huge, especially in today's environment with the SUAS threat and easily being detectable. As far as movement signatures and stuff like that go. I think another important thing to mention too is just having somebody to. We talk about planning and we talk about having these routes and everything in the planning process set and ready to go. But I think leaders need to remember that it's important to be flexible. You can execute the same plan at a different location, but what needs to happen is you need to be deconflicting routes. You need to make sure, because we know the enemy has the votes. So where we planned on our map recon or where we planned on prior to during that planning process may not be the actual location in which we execute. So communication needs to happen up and down as far as changing locations, and leaders just need to be fluid and flexible and be able to execute a plan or a casualty handoff in whatever location is available at the time. But part of that is deconflicting routes and all that stuff like that. I feel like that's in a part or a role that has yet to be identified or really hammered down on whose responsibility it is to actually deconflict those routes.
No, absolutely. I think, as we continue to move through and try to figure out and get everybody certified on prolonged field care, the emphasis is just do the regular old field care, the tried and true, high and tight on the tourniquet and get the bandage and double it up and get the fluids in them. Focus on that, and then as the Army continues to make the training more ubiquitous and people can get more people trained, then we can have the conversation about the prolonged field care. And right now, we just want you to stop the bleeding, get them safe, maintain fire superiority, and you'll be successful, at least in JMRC.
All right, great conversation this morning. I'd like to thank the panel members for expertise and discussing what you've seen, effective TTPs or not, and recommendations and how units can improve prior to getting here to a CTC and ultimately better preparing themselves for combat. I hope this discussion narrowed your scope and allowed you to further focus your formation. As you train at home station, we encourage you to focus on your ability to execute critical tasks violently and aggressively, again, at night, over long periods of time, and done so with proper fieldcraft. Do not rush to reach the collective level. During this podcast, we've referred to several doctrinal references. We also always encourage units to refer to TC 3-21.76, which is the Ranger Handbook for small unit tactics. As we continue to transform and innovate within our Army, It should not change the requirement to master the basics. The technology should be leveraged to enhance our mastery. Thank you.